I remember that evening so clearly, like a scene from a movie I've watched too many times. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sugar. My homemade pie was still warm, wrapped in foil with care. I added 2 slices of his favorite chocolate cake, the kind he always asked for on his birthday. Tucked between them was a note I had rewritten 5 times, trying to find the perfect balance between "I miss you" and "I love you." Daniel had been staying late at the office for weeks, and I told myself he was just stressed, overwhelmed. Still, something in me craved connection, or maybe I was chasing a version of us we hadn't been in a long time. I slipped on my coat, glanced in the mirror, and smiled. Not because I felt beautiful, but because I hoped this would make him smile. That was the point, really. I wasn't looking for grand gestures or apologies. I just wanted a small moment back, a shared bite of pie, a kiss on the cheek, a reminder that we still knew how to find each other in the mess. I got into the car with my heart tapping against my ribs like it knew something I didn't. The night was quiet, the streets nearly empty, and I imagined what he might say when he saw me. "You didn't have to do this," with that little grin that made everything feel all right. I pictured him leaning back in his chair, tired but grateful, pulling me into one of those long, safe hugs. I let my mind wander there, to the softness of it all. Because sometimes, when the heart aches, you wrap it in daydreams like a blanket. And that night, I was clinging to hope like it was all I had left. The office building looked different at night, colder somehow, all glass and silence. I parked in the visitor lot, grabbed the basket from the passenger seat, and took a deep breath before heading in. The night guard, a kind older man named Walter, gave me a familiar smile. "Bringing him a treat, huh?" he chuckled, holding the door open for me like he always did. I nodded, trying to play it cool, but my palms were sweating. "Just a little surprise," I said, hoping the crack in my voice wasn't as obvious as it felt. The elevator ride was quiet, just me and my thoughts echoing in that tiny space. I thought about how things used to be, how he'd bring me lunch when I was buried in deadlines, how we used to laugh in the car with the windows down and no destination. Somewhere along the way, life got heavy. Work, bills, routines. I kept wondering if love always had to grow quieter with time, or if maybe we'd just stopped listening. Tonight, I was trying to speak louder, with pie and cake and one small note. As I stepped into the hallway, the familiar hum of overhead lights buzzed softly above me. His office was near the end, that same door I used to wait outside of when we'd meet for dinner. I could almost hear his laugh, the way it used to be before the late nights became normal, and the kisses goodbye turned into distracted nods. I walked slowly, balancing the basket, heart thudding. I wanted to believe this would mean something, that he'd see it for what it was, not dessert, but an offering, a plea for us. I paused just outside his office door, adjusting the strap of my purse and smoothing my hair with one hand. My other hand held tight to the basket, like it was holding me together. I could hear the soft hum of his desk lamp, the faint clicking of a keyboard, maybe even his voice on a call. I smiled to myself. This was the moment, the surprise. I imagined him looking up, tired eyes softening when he saw me. "Jess," he'd say, surprised but touched. That's what I was chasing, that flicker of warmth we used to live inside. But instead of knocking, I stood there for a second longer. Something in me hesitated, a whisper I couldn't quite hear, a heaviness in the air I couldn't name. I adjusted the note inside the basket one last time, making sure it sat just right. It read, "You're still my favorite part of every day." I almost laughed at how cheesy it sounded now, how vulnerable it felt. But that was the thing about love, wasn't it? You had to be a little brave, a little foolish. I lifted my hand toward the doorknob, heart brimming with hope. And just as I reached for it, something made me freeze. A sound. Soft. Breathy. Laughter. A woman's laugh. Then a voice, low and familiar, murmuring something I couldn't make out. My fingers hovered in the air, trembling. I leaned closer, barely breathing. Through the crack in the door, a sliver of light poured out. And what I saw on the other side? That changed everything. At first, my brain didn't register what I was seeing. It felt like I'd walked into the wrong scene, like my eyes had betrayed me. Or maybe I was dreaming. Daniel's back was turned to me, but I knew that silhouette like my own reflection. And the woman in his arms? Her laughter had stopped. Her head was tilted up toward him, lips parted in a way no wife should ever have to see. My hands, still holding the basket, went numb. Everything inside me went painfully, brutally quiet. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. The note I'd written, the pie I'd baked, the pieces of my heart, they all slipped from my fingers and hit the floor like broken glass. I watched from the hallway, frozen in place, as Olivia, his secretary, touched his face like she belonged there. And Daniel? He kissed her like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I didn't exist. I backed away one step, then another, as if retreating could somehow undo what I'd just seen. My chest burned, but I couldn't cry. Not yet. Rage had started bubbling up through the numbness, like fire under ice. I turned and walked out without saying a word, my footsteps slow and steady, as if I were afraid I might explode if I moved too fast. Walter, the guard, smiled again when I passed by. But I couldn't meet his eyes. I felt like a ghost, hovering in my own life, watching everything unravel. And as I stepped into the cold night air, one truth settled over me like a storm cloud. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. The ride home was a blur. I don't remember the turns I took, the red lights I stopped at, or the songs playing on the radio. I just remember gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Every breath hurt. Not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, dull, soul-deep ache. I kept hearing that laugh. Hers. Over and over again, like it had been stitched into my memory in permanent thread. I thought of all the nights he'd texted, "Working late, babe," and how easily I'd believed him. When I got home, the silence swallowed me whole. The lights were still on from when I left, my half-drunk tea sitting cold on the counter. The house looked the same, but nothing felt familiar anymore. I sank into the couch, coat still on, shoes still wet from the pavement. That's when the tears finally came. Hot, bitter, relentless. Not because he cheated, but because I had loved him so fully. So blindly. And I realized then that he had walked away from something real for... what? A thrill? An ego stroke? But the sadness didn't last long, because something else had started to rise up inside me. Something darker, sharper. Rage. And not the kind that burns out quick. No. This was a quiet kind of fury, the kind that plans, that calculates, that waits. I wiped my tears and sat up straighter, breathing in the bitterness and letting it settle. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't scream. I'd think. And then I'd make damn sure they both remembered who I was. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the second slice of cake still sitting on the counter. Untouched, innocent. I picked it up slowly, ran my thumb along the edge of the plate, and then dropped it straight into the trash. There was no poetry left in that cake, no sweetness in any of it, just crumbs. Crumbs of who I had been. And that woman, the one who baked pies and wrote notes and hoped her husband would come home with a kiss, she died the moment that office door cracked open. But something else was born in her place. Not a monster, no. I wasn't about to turn into someone bitter or cruel. But I was about to become someone with teeth. Someone who didn't just take the hit and crawl away. I sat down with a pen and paper, not to write another note, but to make a list. My hand was steady now. No more trembling. No more hoping. Just clarity. I would give him one final gift, not wrapped in foil or tied with a ribbon. This one would be cold, calculated, and unforgettable. Because if Daniel thought that moment in the office was the end of the story, he was wrong. It was just the crack that split the ground open. What came next would be the real shock. And I already knew exactly how it would start. Sleep never came that night. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it might offer some kind of answer. But I didn't want comfort anymore. I wanted control. By morning, my tears had dried into something solid, something focused. I opened Daniel's laptop, the one he forgot to log out of before leaving for work, and started digging. Emails, messages, calendar events that didn't quite add up. It was all there, waiting, like breadcrumbs he'd never expected anyone to follow. I didn't just want proof. I wanted a pattern. I mapped out dates and times, hotel bookings tucked under vague client dinners, texts that read like they came from a romance novel no one should be living while married. He had been so careless, so smug. And Olivia? She wasn't innocent either. I found her messages too, always sent after hours, always signed with little hearts. I read everyone. Not to torture myself, but to sharpen my strategy. And slowly, a plan began to take shape, clear as glass and twice as dangerous. By the third cup of coffee, I had everything I needed. But I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. That would be too easy. Too quick. No, I wanted it to sting. To echo. That's when I thought of Olivia's husband. A man I'd met only once, at some company picnic, quiet and polite. The kind of man who looked like he still believed in honesty. I tracked him down through a shared address in an email thread. Then I sent him a message. Just one line. We should talk. I think we've both been sleeping next to strangers. He replied within the hour. His name was Aaron. The message was short, cautious, but something in it told me he already knew. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to feel the tremble under his feet. We met that afternoon at a cafe just far enough from the office, the kind of place where no one asked questions. When he walked in, I recognized the same look I'd worn in the mirror the night before. Hollowed-out shock, barely hiding the storm beneath. We didn't exchange small talk. There was no need. I slid a manila folder across the table. He didn't open it right away, just looked at me, jaw tense, eyes heavy. Thank you, he said quietly, and I understood it wasn't gratitude. It was grief. Then he flipped it open and saw what I'd collected. Printed screenshots, overlapping calendars, images I never wanted to see again. He didn't flinch. Just nodded once, like this was the final confirmation of something he'd been trying not to believe. And then he asked the same question I'd been circling for hours. What do we do now? I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I told him calmly that they didn't deserve privacy, not after the way they'd violated our trust in the shadows. I wanted this to be public, not dramatic, not petty, visible. Corporate policy was clear. No undisclosed relationships, especially between manager and subordinate. I had the handbook saved on my desktop. Aaron agreed. They won't see it coming, he said, voice low and steady. I nodded. Exactly. And that's when we began building the perfect reveal. The days that followed felt different. I wasn't waiting around anymore, hoping he'd come home with some pathetic excuse. I had purpose now. Every free moment was spent organizing, refining, preparing. Aaron and I shared information quietly, like co-conspirators in a silent war. We combed through office chatter, policy memos, even social media breadcrumbs. It was astonishing how reckless they had been. Lunch breaks that lined up too often, business trips that mysteriously overlapped, whispers from coworkers that suddenly made perfect sense. At night, I would lie in bed, phone in hand, going over the timeline one more time. I wasn't obsessing. I was orchestrating. And in those hours, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the loud, ego-driven kind. This was quieter, cleaner. I wasn't broken anymore. I was building something. A reckoning. And the thought of Daniel standing there, blindsided and speechless, gave me just enough warmth to sleep soundly for the first time in weeks. The final detail fell into place when the company announced their annual gala, a celebration of milestones, of family values, and leadership excellence. It was perfect. A stage, an audience, and both of them dressed to impress. I RSVP'd with a smile and picked out a dress that made me feel like the woman I used to be. Before lies, before silence, before betrayal. This wasn't just revenge. It was a reminder of who I am and exactly what I'm capable of when pushed too far. The night of the gala arrived like a performance I'd been rehearsing in my mind for days. The venue was glowing, chandeliers, soft jazz, glasses clinking, polite laughter echoing through the hall. I stepped out of the car and into the cool air, heels clicking on the pavement, heart steady. My dress shimmered under the lights, tailored just enough to remind Daniel what he'd lost and what he'd underestimated. As I walked in, heads turned. Not because of the dress, really, but because I looked unshaken, controlled, radiant. Daniel didn't see me right away. He was near the stage, playing the charming executive, arm draped casually around Olivia's lower back. She looked exactly like someone who believed she'd gotten away with something. They both did. I smiled at that, not bitterly, but knowingly. Because tonight, I wasn't just his wife. I was the storm they didn't bother to check the forecast for. I greeted a few familiar faces, all of them commenting on how lovely I looked. "You're glowing," someone said. If only they knew why. I waited patiently through the speeches, the toasts, the polite pats on the back. My moment was coming, and I wasn't about to rush it. When Daniel saw me from across the room, his smile faltered just slightly. Olivia turned too, her hand still on his arm. I raised my glass in their direction. Not a toast, a signal. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to set the stage on fire. And when the microphone was offered for a few words from the executive's wife, I stepped forward with a warmth they didn't yet know was laced with gasoline. I took the microphone with a practiced smile, the kind that looks soft on the surface but hides steel underneath. The room was hushed, polite, waiting. I scanned the crowd, pausing just long enough on Daniel's face to let him know. This wasn't going to be the toast he expected. "Good evening," I began, voice calm, almost gentle. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but when you're married to someone as dedicated as Daniel, sometimes you feel inspired to bring a little something sweet. There was a murmur of laughter, light and unsuspecting. I turned slightly toward him. "Daniel, I brought you something, just like last week. Except this time." I reached into my clutch and pressed a button on the small remote hidden inside. "It's not cake?" Behind me, the screen on stage lit up, and silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. Image after image appeared. Hotel entrances, kisses behind office doors, texts that read, "She'll never know." The slideshow moved slowly, deliberately. No need to rush. Gasps echoed through the room. Chairs shifted. Someone dropped a glass. I didn't flinch. I looked right at him as his face drained of color, his mouth parting like he wanted to form words and couldn't. Olivia beside him was already trembling, reaching out to steady herself. And right on cue, the ballroom doors opened. And there was Aaron. Dressed sharp, jaw clenched, holding up printed emails like evidence in a courtroom. His eyes met mine. A nod. Just one. The truth was out, and there was no crawling back from it. No one moved for a moment. It was the kind of silence that holds weight, the stunned, suffocating quiet before reputations crumble. Daniel stood there, still frozen, blinking as if he could somehow erase what everyone had just seen. Olivia's hands were shaking. Her boss, her colleagues, even her friends from HR stared in horror, no one coming to her defense. I stepped down from the stage slowly, heels tapping like punctuation. I didn't need to scream. The images had already said everything. I passed Daniel as I walked off, and for a second, he tried to speak. A whisper of my name like it still belonged to him. I didn't stop. I didn't look at him. He had lost the right to my attention the second he gave it to someone else behind a locked door. Olivia turned away, burying her face in her hands. Aaron stood a few feet back, arms folded, watching it all unfold with the same stillness I felt inside. We had done what we came to do, not for vengeance, for truth, for clarity, for closure. By the time I reached the exit, the buzz behind me had turned into chaos. Whispers, gasps, people pulling out their phones, eyes darting between the stage and the accused. But I didn't need to see it. I already knew. The masks were off. The damage was done. And what I left behind in that ballroom wasn't just a broken man and a scandal. I left behind a chapter, a version of myself who stayed silent. She was gone. What came next? That was mine to write. The morning after the gala, the headlines in Daniel's office inbox spoke louder than any apology ever could. Executive under review. Internal breach of conduct. Possible termination pending. HR didn't waste time. Olivia was escorted out before lunch, her badge deactivated, her email erased. Daniel was placed on leave. Indefinitely. Suddenly, all those long nights at the office didn't look so noble anymore. The same people who once admired him now avoided his gaze in the hallways, as if betrayal might be contagious. I watched it all unfold from a distance, not with bitterness, but with a strange calm. I wasn't proud of what happened. But I wasn't ashamed of it either. He made choices. I simply removed the curtain. The whispers didn't scare me. The judgment didn't touch me. If anything, there was a quiet strength in the way I carried myself through it. Not as a woman scorned, but as a woman done being dismissed. I filed for divorce the next day. No screaming, no theatrics, just signatures and silence. Daniel tried to call. Once. Twice. I let it ring. Then I blocked the number. I had nothing left to say to a man who only listened when the whole room was watching. I didn't need closure. I had truth. And with that truth came freedom. Legal counsel took care of the rest. What I was owed, I claimed. The house, the car, the accounts he never thought I'd touch. I didn't take it out of spite. I took it because I deserved it, because he forgot who I was. And I just reminded him. People always assume you'll fall apart after something like that you'll crawl into bed and stay there for weeks, crying over what used to be. But grief doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it shows up in the grocery store aisle when you realize you don't need to buy his favorite cereal anymore. Sometimes it's in the quiet of your living room, noticing how much more peaceful the house feels without his phone buzzing at midnight. And sometimes it's just relief that he's gone. I began reclaiming the little things first. Playlists, pillows, passwords. I repainted the bedroom, donated his old books, threw out the mug he always left by the sink. It wasn't anger that fueled me. It was clarity. Every drawer I emptied, every closet I cleared, felt like I was making space. For breath. For light. For me. The woman who had stayed too quiet for too long was finally letting herself be loud, even if only in the privacy of her own home. And that silence? It didn't ache anymore. It healed. I met friends for lunch again, started saying yes to things I used to turn down. I even signed up for a baking class, not because I needed to learn, but because I wanted to share something I loved without anyone taking it for granted. The instructor smiled when I walked in, and for the first time in what felt like years, I smiled back without faking it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And that more than any revenge or settlement was the sweetest part of all. A few weeks later, I found myself at a little cafe downtown. Nothing fancy, just a quiet spot with good coffee and a window seat I used to daydream in. I sat across from my best friend, a slice of chocolate cake in front of me, the kind I used to bake for him. But this time, it wasn't for anyone else, just me. She raised her eyebrows with a grin. "Dessert before lunch?" she asked. I smiled as I took the first bite. "I've earned it," I said. And I meant it. There was something poetic about it all. How the story that started with a pie ended with a piece of cake. Not because I needed sweetness, but because I had taken back the meaning of it. I wasn't mourning anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology or some miracle of closure. I had already walked through the fire and come out clean, lighter, stronger, and more certain than ever that love, real love, starts with loving yourself enough not to settle for crumbs. I looked out the window as the world passed by, feeling no rush, no ache, no unfinished business. Just peace. I leaned back in my chair, took another bite, and laughed softly to myself. He always thought I was just the woman who brought dessert. What he never realized, what she never saw coming, is that I was also the woman who brought the reckoning.
I'll create a compelling revenge story following all your guidelines. I'll maintain past tense throughout, avoid any forbidden words, places, and structure it according to the 3-part format with proper word counts per segment. Division head outsourced my entire department after 22 years of service. He forgot I own the patents to their main products. Part 1. The status quo and foreshadowing segment. 1. 450 words. Michelle, after 22 years, we're outsourcing your entire function, Travis announced, his voice lacking even the slightest hint of emotion. Your last day is Friday. I sat across from him in his glass-walled office, the Denver skyline stretching behind him like a postcard backdrop for my professional execution. Travis Ellington had been division head for exactly 8 months, and in that time, he'd managed to dismantle much of what I'd spent over 2 decades building. Swallowing the knot in my throat, I nodded politely. Thank you for the years of experience. His shoulders visibly relaxed. He'd clearly expected tears, perhaps begging. Instead, I stood up calmly, smoothed my skirt, and extended my hand for a final shake. His relief was palpable as our brief handshake concluded what he thought was the end of my story at Solvix Engineering. My name is Michelle Tran, and at 55, I never imagined I'd be starting over. When I joined Solvix as a young engineer in 2001, we were just a scrappy startup with ambitious dreams of revolutionizing industrial automation systems. I had worked countless weekends, missed vacations, and sacrificed family time to help transform those dreams into reality. Now, our hydraulic control systems were industry standards, used in everything from manufacturing plants to aerospace applications. Walking back to my department, 6 people, all receiving the same news that morning, I maintained my composure. Jessica, my most talented protégé, was red-eyed at her desk. "How can they do this?" she whispered as I passed. "The whole HVAC system was your creation." I simply squeezed her shoulder. What I couldn't tell her, what nobody except my attorney knew, was that back when Solvix was struggling financially, we had made an unusual arrangement. Instead of the higher salary I deserved, I accepted significantly lower compensation in exchange for retaining patent rights to certain core technologies I developed. the company received exclusive licensing at favorable rates as long as I remained employed. The agreement, signed by the original founder, had been filed away and forgotten by everyone except me. Travis couldn't possibly know that the patents for the technology architecture in our HVX 300 series, the product that generated 40% of company revenue, were registered under my name. The overseas team he'd hired in Bangalore would hit an invisible wall once I was gone. As I began quietly cleaning out my desk that afternoon, an email arrived from Human Resources with exit paperwork. The severance was insulting. 16 weeks for 22 years. But what they'd soon discover would be worth so much more. 22 years earlier, I had walked into Solvix Engineering for the first time, carrying nothing but a messenger bag and boundless determination. The original offices were nothing like the gleaming glass tower we now occupied, just 2 floors of a converted warehouse with questionable heating and a persistent smell of motor oil. "Welcome aboard," Harold Jenkins, the founder, had said, pumping my hand vigorously. "We can't offer much in salary yet, but we're going to change the way industrial systems function. You'll have ownership in whatever you create here." Harold had meant it both figuratively and literally. When I developed the first prototype of what would become our hydraulic variable axis control system, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Instead of letting my innovation become the property of whatever corporation might acquire our assets, Harold had drawn up the unusual patent arrangement. Solvix would have exclusive licensing rights as long as I remained part of the team, but the intellectual property would stay with its creator. "This protects both of us," he'd explained. "The company gets the technology at favorable rates, and you get security no matter what happens." Over the years, as Solvix grew from struggling startup to industry leader, the arrangement faded into background knowledge. Harold retired 8 years ago, and each successive leadership team seemed less aware of those early agreements. The current management, including Travis, had clearly never reviewed the original IP documentation. For 22 years, I'd been the quiet force behind our innovation department. I never sought the spotlight, only the satisfaction of solving complex engineering challenges and mentoring talented young minds like Jessica. My team had been small but mighty, responsible for 5 major product lines that collectively represented over 60% of company revenue. Travis, with his MBA from Wharton and spreadsheet-focused worldview, saw only a department of 6 people with high Western salaries that could be replaced by 15 engineers in India at 1/3 the cost. What his efficiency models failed to capture was the institutional knowledge, the creative problem-solving, and most importantly, the ownership of key intellectual property. The days following Travis's announcement passed in a blur of paperwork and awkward goodbyes. I met with each team member individually, providing reference letters and industry contacts to help with their transitions. Jessica cried during our farewell lunch. "What will you do now?" she asked, pushing her food around her plate. I offered a mysterious smile. "I'm not done yet," I said. "Sometimes being underestimated is actually an advantage." She looked confused, but I kept my plans to myself. Friday would arrive soon enough, and then the real work would begin. On my final day, I arrived earlier than usual, 6 a.m., before anyone except security was in the building. I had arranged special permission to access all areas, claiming a need to collect personal items from various testing labs. In reality, I was saying goodbye to the technologies I had nurtured from conception to market domination. The HVX laboratory had been my second home for years. I ran my fingers along the prototype of our first successful model, now displayed like a museum piece. Next to it sat progressively more advanced iterations, culminating in the HVAX 300, our current flagship product. Each represented countless hours of problem-solving, collaboration, and passion. By 8 a.m., other employees began filtering in. Many stopped by my office, now half-packed into cardboard boxes, to offer awkward farewells. At 10 a.m., my team gathered for a final meeting. "I've been honored to work with every one of you," I told them, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Whatever happens next, remember that what we built here mattered, At noon, Travis's assistant delivered my official termination paperwork with practiced corporate detachment. I signed everything without comment and handed over my security badge. By 2 p.m., I was walking through the lobby for the last time, carrying 2 decades of memories in a single box. That evening, I sat in my attorney Philip's office, watching as he reviewed the documents spread across his desk. "Everything's in order," he confirmed. "The patent rights are ironclad. The licensing agreement clearly terminates with your employment." "And the new agreement I proposed?" Philip shuffled through the papers. "Consulting rates at 5 times your former salary, exclusive rights management, and veto power over any modifications to your technologies. It's aggressive, but they'll have little choice. How long until they realize the problem? That depends on how quickly they try to implement changes with the new team. The system will continue functioning as is, but any attempt to modify the code or design will trigger licensing verification. I'm guessing 2 weeks, maximum." I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, sadness, and a strange sort of freedom. "Send the official notice on Monday, but hold the consulting proposal until they contact us." The weekend stretched before me, my first in decades without Solvik's work to occupy my thoughts. I spent Saturday in my garden, replanting spring bulbs and clearing away dead leaves, a fitting metaphor for my current situation. On Sunday, I hiked through Red Rocks Park, watching rock climbers scale seemingly impossible vertical faces, finding new handholds where none appeared to exist. Monday morning arrived with unfamiliar quietness. No early alarm, no rushed breakfast, no commute. Instead, I savored my coffee while reading news on my tablet. At precisely 9 a.m., Philip would be sending the cease and desist letter to Solvik's legal department. The countdown to chaos had begun. The first call came 3 days later, much sooner than I had anticipated. "Michelle, this is Diane from legal at Solvik's." The voice on the other end of the line sounded strained. "We've received some concerning correspondence from your attorney. There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Diane," I replied calmly. "The patents for the HVX system architecture are registered under my name, with Solvik's holding exclusive licensing rights contingent upon my employment. As my employment has been terminated, so has the licensing agreement." A long pause followed. "Could we schedule a meeting to discuss this further?" "My attorney handles all communication now. I'm sure you have his contact information." Over the next week, the calls escalated up the corporate ladder. First Diane, then the head of legal, then the chief technology officer. I referred them all to Philip, who reported back with undisguised amusement. "They're in full panic mode," he said during our Thursday update. "The outsourced team can't make any modifications to the system without triggering licensing alerts. Production on the next generation HVX 400 has completely stalled." I felt a flicker of concern for my former team. "Have they contacted Jessica or any of the others?" "From what I understand, they've been trying to rehire your whole department, but most have already accepted positions elsewhere. Jessica started at Navarro Systems on Monday." I smiled at that. Navarro was one of our biggest competitors, and Jessica would thrive there. 9 days after my departure, Travis Ellington himself called. I let it go to voicemail. "Michelle, this is Travis. We need to discuss the patent situation immediately. This is creating significant operational challenges. Please call me back as soon as possible." I didn't return his call. Instead, I forwarded the message to Philip with a single instruction: "Let them stew another week." That week, I took a short trip to Glenwood Springs, soaking in the natural hot springs and enjoying the mountain air. For the first time in years, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to release. Each night, I slept deeply without dreams of project deadlines or engineering problems. When I returned home, there were 4 more messages from Travis, each more desperate than the last. The final one abandoned all pretense of corporate composure. "Michelle, please. The board is breathing down my neck. We've had to halt 3 production lines. Whatever you want, we'll discuss it. Just call me back." Philip reported that Solvix's stock had dropped 12% since news of the production challenges had leaked to industry analysts. The board was scheduled to meet in emergency session on Friday. "Time to present our proposal," I told him. "Send over the consulting agreement." The terms were straightforward, but heavily in my favor. I would provide exclusive licensing for all my patents at reasonable rates, plus consulting services at 5 times my former salary. Additionally, I would have final approval on any modifications to my technologies, and I would train the new engineers, both in Denver and remotely in Bangalore. Thursday morning, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Travis standing on my porch, dark circles under his eyes and his typically perfect appearance noticeably disheveled. "Michelle," he said, his voice hoarse. "The board has removed me as division head. I've been demoted to regional sales. I just wanted to speak with you directly before I leave Denver." I studied his face, not with satisfaction at his downfall, but with the weary recognition that he had learned nothing from this experience. "Travis, this wasn't personal," I said finally. "It was about respecting the value of what was built over decades." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "The new interim division head wants to meet with you. Eleanor Jenkins." I couldn't hide my surprise. "Harold's daughter?" Travis nodded. "She's been called in to handle the crisis." Eleanor Jenkins had her father's eyes, keen, intelligent, and capable of looking straight through corporate nonsense. We sat across from each other at a corner table in a small cafe downtown, away from Solvix headquarters. "I returned from London as soon as I heard," she said, stirring her tea methodically. "Dad always said you were the backbone of Solvix's innovation. I should have stayed more involved after he retired." Eleanor had chosen a different path from her father, becoming an international consultant for renewable energy projects. She had inherited his shares in Solvix, but had remained a passive board member until now. "The board has asked me to resolve this situation," she continued. "They've unanimously approved your consulting proposal." I raised an eyebrow. That was fast. "Production has completely halted on our main product lines. The Bangalore team is skilled, but they can't work without access to the foundational architecture. Every day we delay costs millions." "And Travis's outsourcing decision?" Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. "Being reevaluated. His approach was short-sighted." I sipped my coffee, considering. "The agreement isn't just about money, Eleanor. It's about respect for innovation and the people who create it." "I understand that better than most," she replied. "Which is why I'm proposing an addition to your terms." She reached into her leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. I scanned it quickly, then looked up in surprise. "Director of Advanced Innovation, with a seat on the executive committee?" Eleanor nodded. "We need to rebuild what was lost. Your patents are valuable, but your vision is irreplaceable. I want you to lead a new department focused on next-generation technologies, with complete autonomy and direct board access." The offer was unexpected and flattering, but caution tempered my response. "What about the outsourced team?" "They'll continue handling routine maintenance and implementation, under your guidance. But core innovation returns to Denver, with you at the helm and the authority to rebuild your team." I thought of Jessica and the others, now scattered across different companies. "I'll need to bring in new talent, and competitive compensation packages to attract them. You'll have complete budget authority. The board has approved whatever resources you need." We spoke for another hour, hashing out details. By the time we parted, I had agreed in principle to Eleanor's proposal, pending final review with Philip. That evening, as I discussed the terms with my attorney, an even more surprising twist emerged. "Michelle," Philip said, reviewing the fine print. "This innovation director position, It includes an ownership stake, 5% of Solvix vested immediately. I must have looked shocked, because he chuckled. Eleanor's serious about keeping you. 5% makes you one of the largest individual shareholders. After how they pushed me out. Sometimes the universe has a way of righting wrongs, Philip mused. This is a remarkable turnaround. The following Monday, I found myself back in the Solvix building, but this time I was escorted to the executive floor. Eleanor had arranged a corner office with views of both the mountains and downtown Denver. On the desk sat a small wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo of Harold Jenkins and me from 2005, standing beside the first production model of the HVX system. A note in Eleanor's handwriting read, "Dad always said Michelle was the heart of Solvix. Time to make that official." As I set up my new workspace, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Heard rumors you're back. Is it true?" I smiled as I replied, "Better than back. How do you feel about Navarro Systems versus a chance to build something revolutionary?" "For you? I'd give notice today," came her immediate response. The pieces were falling into place, but the most dramatic revelation was still to come. 2 weeks into my new role, I requested access to all of Solvix's financial and operational data for the past 5 years. As Director of Advanced Innovation with board-level clearance, such requests could no longer be denied. What I discovered sent shockwaves through the executive committee. Travis's outsourcing plan hadn't been developed in isolation. He had been working with external consultants from Vantage Group, a private equity firm quietly accumulating Solvix shares. Their strategy was textbook: slash operating costs, boost short-term profits, then sell the hollowed-out company at a premium before the long-term damage became apparent. "The timing matches perfectly," I explained during the emergency board meeting. "Travis joins 8 months ago. 3 months later, Vantage begins acquiring shares through various shell companies. 5 months in, he proposes outsourcing our core innovation team despite record profits." Eleanor leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "And you believe Travis was deliberately placed here to orchestrate this?" "The evidence suggests it," I replied, displaying a series of email exchanges retrieved from company servers. He was in contact with Vantage executives before his arrival. Every efficiency review, every cost-cutting measure was reported directly to them. Howard Donnelly, our longest-serving board member, looked ashen. These acquisition patterns, they were building toward a controlling interest. If they'd succeeded, Solvix would have been gutted and sold for parts, I finished. Our patents would have been licensed to multiple manufacturers, undermining our competitive advantage. "Which failed because of your patent ownership," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "An arrangement they never discovered in their due diligence." The realization of how close Solvix had come to destruction sobered everyone present. If my patents had been company property, nothing would have stopped Travis's plan. My termination would have been merely the first step in dismantling everything Harold Jenkins had built. "We need to act decisively," Eleanor declared. "Howard, initiate a shareholder rights plan immediately. Michelle, work with legal to identify and protect all remaining intellectual property. We'll convene again tomorrow to discuss next steps." After the meeting, Eleanor asked me to stay behind. "You saved this company twice," she said quietly. "First, by creating the technology that made us industry leaders, and now by exposing this takeover attempt before it succeeded." I shook my head. "Your father saved the company when he recognized that people, not just products, deserved protection. That patent arrangement was his idea, not mine." "He always said the same about you," Eleanor replied with a smile. "That his best decision was protecting your innovations when everyone else said he was crazy." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. We implemented aggressive defenses against the hostile takeover, including a poison pill provision that would dilute any attempt to gain controlling interest. Travis was dismissed for breach of fiduciary duty, with evidence of his collaboration with Vantage turned over to federal regulators. Most satisfying was rebuilding my innovation team. Jessica agreed to return as deputy director, bringing 2 other former team members with her. Together, we began conceptualizing a new generation of adaptive control systems that would make our existing technologies look primitive by comparison. 1 month after exposing the Vantage scheme, I received an invitation to meet with Harold Jenkins himself, now living in semi-retirement in Boulder. His health had declined, but his mind remained sharp as ever. "I always knew they'd underestimate you," he said, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "Quiet brilliance is invisible to people focused on short-term gains." "I learned that from you," I replied. He leaned forward, eyes twinkling. "Want to know the best part of this whole story?" "What's that?" "There's one more patent they never found, the most valuable one of all." Harold's revelation about an undiscovered patent sent me diving into historical records. What I found hidden in the original company filings was astonishing. A master patent for an adaptive learning framework that underpinned not just the HVX system, but potentially all future iterations of our technology. The patent had been filed under a separate holding company, Transcendent Engineering Solutions, with ownership split equally between Harold and me. It granted broad protection for the fundamental concepts behind our most successful products, extending decades beyond our other patents. He created a fail-safe, I explained to Eleanor after verifying the documents with Philip. If Solvix ever faced an existential threat, this patent could either save it or serve as leverage. "And it's completely separate from your employment agreement," Eleanor noted. "Even if they had discovered your other patents, this would have remained hidden." The timing couldn't have been better. Despite our defensive measures, Vantage Group had accumulated enough shares to demand board representation. Their designated member, Maxwell Reed, arrived at headquarters for his first official meeting with undisguised arrogance. "I'm here to help streamline operations," he announced to the assembled executives. "Solvix has tremendous potential that's been hampered by traditional thinking." Eleanor exchanged a glance with me before responding. "We're always open to fresh perspectives, Mr. Reed. In fact, we have an exciting announcement today about our intellectual property portfolio." I stepped forward with the master patent documentation. "This framework patent, which predates all our current products, has just been transferred back to Solvix's exclusive control in exchange for certain guarantees about our innovation division." Reed's expression shifted from confusion to shock as he scanned the documents, understanding their implications. The blood drained from his face. "This covers everything," he said hoarsely. "Yes," I agreed pleasantly. "Everything." The following month brought the complete unraveling of Vantage Group's takeover attempt. The master patent had effectively rendered their strategy obsolete. Without control of the fundamental technology, acquiring Solvix would only give them an empty shell. Their shares were quietly sold off at a significant loss. Maxwell Reed resigned from the board after just 2 meetings. Industry rumors suggested he had also been asked to leave Vantage. Sometimes failure carries its own severe consequences. With the external threat neutralized, we turned our focus inward. Jessica and I led a comprehensive review of Solvix's innovation pipeline, identifying gaps and opportunities. Our new team, a blend of veterans and fresh talent, began developing prototypes that would secure our market leadership for years to come. More personally satisfying was implementing a company-wide policy on intellectual property rights. Under the new system, engineers would receive direct ownership stakes in their innovations, with Solvix maintaining exclusive licensing. The model, dubbed the TRAN Protocol by Eleanor, became a case study in balancing corporate needs with individual recognition. "Innovation thrives when creators have a personal stake in the outcome," I explained during the all-hands meeting announcing the changes. "This isn't just about patents. It's about respect for the minds behind our success." Travis's replacement, a thoughtful woman named Vanessa Moore with both engineering and management experience, embraced the new approach wholeheartedly. Where Travis had seen only costs on a spreadsheet, Vanessa recognized the value of institutional knowledge and creative problem-solving. I wish I could see Travis's face when he realizes what happened, Jessica commented during one of our planning sessions. I don't, I replied honestly. This was never about revenge. It was about recognition of value, both the technology and the people who create it. Eleanor, overhearing this exchange, smiled appreciatively. That's exactly why you belong in that director's chair, Michelle. The balance had finally been restored. The seeds of innovation I had planted over 22 years had grown into a forest that protected not just me, but everyone at Solvix who dared to create. Looking back on my journey from engineer to executive, I realized that true power had always resided in the quietest corners of the company, with those who built rather than those who boasted.